I think, in Silicon Valley, there's this talk of, fail fast, fail often. And I've heard some that sort of push a point, a little bit of counterbalance of, well, let's not have a failure fetish. Failure
Right.
in and of itself is not great. Failure might be expected. And then I think how we respond to those failures or mistakes are key. Because I think part of the Silicon Valley idea is cycles of learning.
Right.
We've had a failure, we've made a mistake. Let's learn from it. Let's move forward better. Going back to Toyota, my mentors there would talk about small tests of change, which means small failures as a way of preventing large failures. And to me, that's where, there's parallels in this quote unquote lean startup methodology. You want to make mistakes early so that you can adjust before and get as much of it as you figured out, get as much of it figured out as you can before you try to scale the business.
Yeah, I think, it's funny hearing you talk about that. I think it's such an important point as I think about my career, also spending a large part of my career as a solopreneur. I mean, what weeks do I not make a mistake? But I think sometimes it's hard to remember them because I'm constantly building on top of it. I'm learning from it and building. I'm almost building over it. I'm back in the day. I used to do a lot of paintings and portraits, and every time as an artist you're doing a painting or portrait, you're always making a mistake, but you're covering it up with some other paint. So
Literally,
you're literally covering it up. And you're building on it. So at the end, it looks like everything was intentional and perfect, but there was mistakes made along the way. And I think you even see that with like famous portraits when they'll do all the analysis to it and they'll say, actually, there's like another portrait underneath this, or there's half of a tree in the left side of this portrait. Mark, this has been absolutely fascinating. So I ask all my guests this closing question. What is one life hack you have for us on how we can either have healthier conversations, better conversations, or healthier relationships, either at work or at home?
So I think, kind of building on the idea of, don't blame people, don't blame individuals for systemic problems. One of the other things that I've learned to not blame people for is being quote unquote resistant to change. So I think this is more of a workplace issue.
Yeah.
And in my work in healthcare, I've been fortunate through a social worker that I was talking to. I got introduced to a concept called motivational interviewing, which has its origins in quite literally counseling and therapy, which I thought you might be interested in considering this as workplace therapy. So motivational interviewing is a really rich topic, and obviously we can't get into all of that. But I think one of the key lessons, whether you're counseling an individual or working with people in the workplace, is how freely people throw about the phrase, well, they're just being resistant to change. And motivational interviewing teaches us that resistance is a natural and an expected part of the change process.
Right.
So when you demonize that resistance, then you get things like passive aggressive, which is going along with it. So, there are ways managers can force compliance, but I would argue nobody's ever built a world-class organization on a culture of compliance.
Right.
Of doing what you're told and not questioning things. So I think just reframing resistance instead of it being a problem, recognizing it's to be expected, and then motivational interviewing teaches us, and I've been able to apply this in the workplace, when people are sort of stuck. I have reasons to do something, and I have reasons why it's challenging, to help work people through to the point where they can articulate their motivations for change. And that's why it's called motivational interviewing. I'm not telling you what your motivation is, but I'm drawing it out of you, and that strengthens somebody's commitment to change to where now that balance can tip to a point where they feel more capable or more confident moving forward and trying something. So that's a phrase I've tried to strike from my vocabulary altogether. Or if I catch myself thinking it, step back and say, wait a minute, they're not a bad person who's being resistant to change. This is the starting point for the change effort.
As you were talking, it made me think of, I don't know if you're familiar with this martial arts form. It's called Aikido.
No.
And it's interesting. It's from Japan. A lot of martial arts is from Japan. But this particular form, the whole premise of Aikido is you never attack your opponents. You redirect their energy. So this feels kind of like
Interesting.
corporate Aikido.